The Great Inversion, shattering 100-year-old paradigms. For a century, we optimized organizations for efficiency, control, and predictability. But in today's complex world, these industrial age principles have become our greatest liability. The Great Inversion represents a fundamental shift in how we organize human work, transforming rigid hierarchies into adaptive networks, centralized control into distributed intelligence, and mechanical efficiency into dynamic resilience. This isn't incremental improvement. This is systematic transformation. The organizations that master this inversion won't just survive disruption, they will become the disruptors. The systems that brought us here cannot take us where we need to go. Every system we have built, from the transportation networks to global supply chains to corporate hierarchies, follow the same logic: centralize, standardize, scale, and control. For a century, we have been told that this is the path to efficiency, to progress, to success. What if the most fundamental assumption in the business is wrong? What if centralization is not the solution but the problem? The 20th century gave us the masterclass of how to build the bigger, faster, more efficient. The great corporations of that era, Ford, GE, IBM, became the titans by perfecting the art of scaling standardized solutions. But today I am going to show you why 21st century need something radically different. I am Badr Arshi, and in next 2 hours I am going to reveal the most profound shift happening in business today, what I call the Great Inversion. You have heard part of this story in my previous talks. You know that competitive advantage is dying. You know that anti-fragility matters more than strength. Today we go deeper, much deeper, and by the end of our time together, you will understand why the most valuable companies of tomorrow won't maximize efficiency, they maximize adaptability. The strongest of the leaders won't be the ones with best answers, but the ones who distribute decision making. The most successful organizations won't be those that avoid failure, but those that metabolize it in the growth. And you will exactly know how to position yourself and your organization to thrive into this inverted world. This isn't futurism, this is already happening. Let me show you where it began. The 20th century business model was built on the foundations of predictability, mass production, economies of scale, 5-year strategic plans. This model worked brilliantly in an era where change was linear and markets were stable. When Henry Ford perfected the assembly line, he created a template for efficiency that dominated for decades. But today we live in what military strategists call VUCA world: volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. Consider this: it took telephone 75 years to reach 100 million users. It took Instagram 2 years TikTok, 9 months. This acceleration isn't just technological, it is psychological. Our institutions, our decision-making frameworks, our leadership models, none of them were designed for this pace of change. But it is not just speed, it is unpredictability. In 2007, Steve Ballmer, then CEO of Microsoft, said, "There is no chance that iPhone will get significant market share." In 2011, McKinsey predicted that by 2020, the total number of electric vehicles on the road would be less than 10 million. The actual number? Over 20 million. More than the double what they predicted. In 2019, not a single financial institution has predicted that pandemic would shut down the world economy within months. When the world becomes this unpredictable, something extraordinary happens to our fundamental assumptions of how to organize and lead. The virtues become vices and vices become virtue. Let me show you what I mean with a story which you have never heard before. Haier Group is the world's largest appliance manufacturer. If you have a refrigerator, a washing machine, or an air conditioner, there is a good chance that it came from Haier or one of its subsidiaries. What makes Haier truly remarkable is not what they make, it is how they are organized. In 2005, Haier's CEO, Zhang Rimin, made a decision that most business leaders would consider insane. He dismantled the entire middle management structure of his 80,000 person company. Instead of a traditional pyramid structure, Haier reorganized into more than 4,000 self-managing micro-enterprises. Each one operates as an independent business with its own P&L responsibility and authority to make decisions. There is no middle management. None. When most CEOs would be centralizing control, Zhang was distributing it. When most organizations would be standardizing, Haier was diversifying. The results? Since 2005, Haier revenue has grown from $12 billion to over $40 billion. They acquired GE Appliances, Fisher and Paykel, and Candy, iconic brands with their own heritage. But here is the most extraordinary part. During COVID-19, when world supply chains collapsed and consumer demands fluctuated widely, Haier's micro-enterprises adapted independently. While competitors struggled with centralized decision-making, Haier's autonomous units pivoted quickly. Haier didn't succeed despite their inverted structure. They succeeded because of it. What Zhang understood, what the most forward-thinking leaders today understand, is that in the world of radical uncertainty, distribution beats concentration, diversity beats standardization, and experimentation beats planning. This is the first principle of the Great Inversion. Distributed intelligence outperforms centralized control. This machine represents the pinnacle of efficiency. Every component optimized for performance, every system fine-tuned for speed. But here is the hidden truth about high efficiency systems, which most business leaders miss. The more efficient a system becomes, the more fragile it becomes. We saw this play out during pandemic. Just-in-time inventory systems, once celebrated as the height of operational excellence, becomes catastrophic liabilities when supply chains broke. Companies that have eliminated all the slack in the pursuit of efficiency found themselves unable to absorb the disruption. Their optimization became their vulnerability. This is the second principle of the Great Inversion. Redundancy outperforms efficiency. Let me give you a real world example that few people know about. Everyone knows Zara as a fast fashion giant, but most don't understand what actually makes them different. When Zara emerged in 1990s, the conventional wisdom in retail was clear. Manufacture in low-cost countries, order in bulk for maximum efficiency, plan collections months in advance. Zara did the opposite. They kept 60% of their production in Spain, Portugal, and nearby countries, much more expensive than Asia. They produce in small batches, not bulk orders, and instead of planning collections far in advance, they design and produce new items in as little as 2 weeks. By conventional metrics, Zara's approach was terribly inefficient. Their production cost was higher, their factories ran below capacity, they paid premium prices for quick shipping. But this inefficiency gave Zara an extraordinary adaptability. When a style started selling well unexpectedly, they could produce more within days. And when a style flopped, they could pivot immediately. The result, while the traditional retailers average 3 to 4 inventory turns per year, Zara achieved 12. While the competitors discounted 30 to 40% of their merchandise, Zara discounted less than 15. Their inefficient model produced profit margins nearly double the industry average. What Zara understood, what the architects of the Great Inversion understand, that in a world of uncertainty, the ability to adapt quickly is worth far more than the ability to produce cheaply. This brings us to our third principle. Adaptability outperforms predictability. What do these famous failures have in common? They all came from successful companies, companies that have resources, talents, and market position, the companies that should have succeeded. But there is something more interesting. These companies didn't just survive these failures, they thrived because of them. After the Fire Phone flopped, costing Amazon $170 million write down, something interesting happened. Rather than retreating from the hardware, Amazon applied what they have learned to create Echo and Alexa ecosystem, now in over 100 million homes worldwide. In the traditional view, failure is something to be avoided, minimized, and hidden when it occurs. In the inverted view, failure is information, it is the feedback, it is the raw material for future success. Traditional view, failure is mistake. Goal, minimize failure. Response, analyze what went wrong. Metric, failure rate. Inverted view, failure is data. Goal, fail informatively. Response, extract minimum learning. Metric, learning rate. This difference is not philosophical, it is strategic, and it is transforming how the most innovative organizations approach risk. Let me share with you a case study you have likely never heard before. Sarah Blackley, built Spanx into a $1 billion company without a single traditional business qualification. No MBA, no corporate experience, no industry connections. What she had was a powerful relationship with failure. Every day at dinner table, Sarah's father would ask his children, "What did you fail at today?" If they didn't have an answer, he would be disappointed. He was teaching his children to reframe failure not as something shameful, but as an evidence of trying something new. This mindset became the foundation of how Spanx operates. When launching new products, Spanx doesn't conduct endless market research or focus groups. Instead, they practice what I call minimum viable experimentation, putting the real products into the market quickly, gathering feedback, and adapting rapidly. Their product development cycles are 40% shorter than the industry averages. Their success rate for the new products is nearly double the industry standard. But here is the critical insight. Spanx's advantage is not just the willingness to experiment, it is their ability to metabolize failure into growth. When a product doesn't perform as expected, Spanx has institutionalized processes to extract minimum learning. They conduct failure autopsies where teams document the specific insights. These insights become the part of their institutional knowledge base, accessible to everyone in the organization. Their best-selling arm tights product, which generated $100 million in its first year, was directly born from the lessons learned from the three previous failed products. This is the fourth principle of the Great Inversion. Learning rate outperforms success rate. Strategic planning has been the cornerstone for business management for decades. Every year, executives retreat to develop detailed roadmaps for the future. 5-year plans, 10-year visions, projected growth rates, precise to the decimal points. There is only one problem. These plans are almost always wrong. A study by McKinsey found that when companies make financial forecasts beyond 1 year, the margin of error exceeds 25%. Beyond 3 years, it exceeds 60%. Yet, we invest enormous resources in this ritual of prediction. For decades, we have used chess as a metaphor for strategic thinking. The grandmaster who sees many moves ahead wins. But today's business environment is not chess. It is more like this game where the board changes while you are playing. New pieces appear unexpectedly and the rules themselves evolve. In this environment, the ability to see many moves ahead is less valuable than the ability to sense and respond of what is happening now. This brings us to one of the most radical ideas in the Great Inversion that few leaders have fully embraced, that strategic sensing outperforms strategic planning. Let me show you what it looks like in practice. When Satya Nadella became CEO of Microsoft in 2014, the company was in trouble. Once a dominant force in technology, Microsoft had become a lumbering giant, slow to adapt, resistant to change, and increasingly irrelevant in a world moving to mobile and cloud. Microsoft's previous strategy had been built around Windows, protecting and extending its desktop monopoly at all costs. This plan was enormously successful until suddenly it wasn't. What Nadella did next offers a perfect case study in strategic sensing versus strategic planning. Rather than crafting a detailed long-term plan, Nadella focused on two things. First, he redefined Microsoft's core purpose, shifting from a PC on every desk to empowering every person and organization on the planet to achieve more. Second, he created what he called sense and response system, an organization's capacity to detect opportunities and threats and quickly reallocate resources towards them. Nadella eliminated the traditional divisional structure that had kept the products like Office, Windows, Azure in separate silos. He implemented regular listening tours where executives engaged directly with customers and developers. Most importantly, he shifted how resources were allocated from annual planning cycles to continuous adjustments. The results were extraordinary. Microsoft's market cap grew from 300 billion to 2 trillion. They became leaders in cloud computing, the market they have initially missed out entirely. They successfully pivoted from software selling to service selling. What is most remarkable about Microsoft's transformation? It is not what Nadella predicted, but it is what he didn't predict. He didn't see the exact path of cloud computing. He didn't anticipate that pandemic would accelerate the digital transformation. He did not know which specific products would succeed. Instead, he built an organization capable of sensing and responding to whatever emerged. And that capability proved far more valuable than any detailed plan could have been. This is the fifth principle of the Great Inversion. Sensing outperforms forecasting. For most of the 20th century, the dominant model for the business ownership was clear. Shareholders own them, executives manage them, employees work from them, customers buy from them. These were the distinct boundaries, rarely crossed. But look at what is happening today. At Patagonia, the ownership has been transferred to a trust dedicated for fighting climate change. At REI, customers are co-owners through their cooperative model. At Aardman Animations, the creators of Wallace and Gromit, the employees own the entire company. At Airbnb, the hosts are not just suppliers, they are partners who shape the platform's evolution. What's emerging is what I called multi-dimensional ownership, where the lines between customer, employee, supplier, and owner become increasingly blurred. And this shift is not just happening at the margins, it is transforming some of the most valuable companies in the world. Let me share a case study few people know about. Svenska Handelsbanken is one of the world's oldest banks, founded in 1871 in Sweden. For decades, it operated like any other bank, but in 1970, it began an experiment that fundamentally inverted the traditional banking model. While most banks were centralizing decision making, creating elaborate hierarchies for loans and services, Handelsbanken did opposite. They pushed virtually all the decision making to the branch level. Local managers could approve loans without headquarters permission. They could set their own interest rates. They could decide which products to promote. This radical decentralization extended to ownership as well. Handelsbanken created a profit-sharing system called Octagonen, where a significant portion of the bank's profits goes to the employees, not as cash bonuses, but as shares held until retirement. Today, Octagonen approximately held 10% of Handelsbanken's shares, making employees collectively as banks one of the largest owners. The results: Handelsbanken outperformed its peers for 50 consecutive years. During the 2008 financial crisis, when banks worldwide were collapsing, Handelsbanken required no government support. They maintained profitability throughout the crisis. What Handelsbanken understood, what the architects of the Great Inversion understand, is that when people have both authority to make decisions and stake in the outcomes, something remarkable happens. Engagement increases, the information flows improves, adaptability accelerates. This is the sixth principle of the Great Inversion. Distributed ownership outperforms the concentrated ownership. We are obsessed with the heroic leaders, the visionary who sees the future, the strategist who outsmart the competitors, the charismatic motivator who inspires the troops. Business media reinforces this narrative constantly. How Reed Hastings reinvented Netflix, Elon Musk's master plan, how Steve Jobs saved Apple. There is just one problem. This narrative is increasingly divorced from reality. Research from Anthony Jane at Harvard Business School shows us that companies that outclass their peers are rarely led by the charismatic visionaries. Instead, they are led by what he calls humble operators, leaders that create systems rather than cult of personalities. But there is something even more fundamental happening, something that represents perhaps the most radical aspect of the Great Inversion. The most innovative organizations today are not just changing who leads, but they are changing what leadership means. Let me show you what I mean. In 2006, Jos de Blok, a nurse in Netherlands, just got frustrated with how healthcare was delivered. Traditional home care organizations became increasingly bureaucratic. Nurses spend most of their time filling out paperwork than caring for patients. So D Block started Buurtzorg, a new kind of healthcare organization. The name means neighborhood care in Dutch. In traditional healthcare organizations, nurses reports to managers and managers reports to executives. Decisions flow down, information flows up, standard procedures govern everything. Buurtzorg inverted this model completely. They organized nurses into self-managing teams of 10 to 12 people. Each team is responsible for 50 to 60 patients in the specific neighborhood. And this is crucial. There were no managers, none. The teams make all decisions themselves: which patients to accept, how to schedule care, how to integrate with other healthcare providers, even how to manage their own finances. The results were extraordinary. In 10 years, Buurtzorg grew from 4 nurses to 14,000, capturing 70% of Dutch home care market. Patient satisfaction scores were highest in the industry. Cost per patient were 40% lower than the competitors. But here's the most fascinating part. George D. Block, the founder, deliberately structured Buurtzorg to function without him. He limited his own authority. He refused to take decisions which teams can make themselves. He created a system where leadership emerges as needed, not a position held by specific people. This is the seventh principle of the Great Inversion. Emergent leadership outperforms hierarchical leadership. For decades, path to business success was clear. Start small, then scale, grow your customer base, expand your product line, enter new markets, acquire competitors. The goal was to become big, then bigger. The logic of scale dominated strategic thinking for generations. It gave us conglomerates in 1970s, leverage buyouts in the 1980s, and roll-up strategies in the 1990s. But something profound is happening in today's economy. A fundamental inversion of the relationship between size and success. Research from Boston Consulting Group shows that from 1980 to 2000, the correlation between the company size and the profitability was strongly positive. Bigger companies generally outperformed the smaller ones. From 2000 to 2015, this relationship weakened significantly. And from 2015 onwards, this correlation actually turned negative in many industries. Smaller companies are now outperforming the larger competitors. What's happening? The advantages of scale haven't disappeared, but these are significantly offset by the disadvantages of complexity. As organizations grow, they accumulate layers of bureaucracy, decision making slows, innovation becomes harder, cultural cohesion becomes weaker. A study from McKinsey found that companies fewer than 100 employees make strategic decisions in an average of 10 days. Companies with 1,000 to 5,000 employees take 30 days, and companies with more than 10,000 employees take 45 days. In a rapidly changing environment, this decision velocity becomes a crucial competitive advantage. This is driving one of the most profound aspects of the Great Inversion. Networked scale outperforms the consolidated scale. Let me show you how it looks like in practice. Remember Haier, the appliance manufacturer we discussed earlier? Their transformation was not just about internal structure. It was about redefining what a company is. In 2019, Haier launched what they called their ecosystem micro-enterprise model. Rather than thinking themselves as a single company, Haier reimagined themselves as a platform for multiple interconnected businesses. Some of these companies make appliances, but others provide services, develop softwares, or create entirely new categories. Some are wholly owned by Haier, others are joint ventures. Still, some others are independent companies plugged into Haier's ecosystem. The result is an organization that has the reach of a giant corporation but the agility of a startup network. They can coordinate when necessary but innovate independently. They can share resources maintaining their distinct identities and purposes. What Hire understood, what the architects of the Great Inversion understand, is that in today's environment, the most valuable form of scale is not the consolidated mass, but the distributed coordination. This is the eighth principle of the Great Inversion. Network effects outperforms the economies of scale. For most of the 20th century, the purpose of the business was straightforward: maximize shareholders' value. Companies existed to make money for their owners. This clarity of purpose drove remarkable wealth creation, but it also created problems: environmental degradation, social inequality, consumer exploitation. In response, we have seen the rise of corporate social responsibility, sustainability initiatives, the stakeholder capitalism. These approaches seek to balance profit with other concerns. But what is happening now goes beyond balancing competing interests. It represents the fundamental inversion of relationship between profit and purpose. Let me show you what I mean with a case study you may not have heard before. In 2022, Evan Chenard, the founder of Patagonia, made an announcement that shocked the world. He was giving away the company, transferring ownership to a trust dedicated to fighting climate change. This was not a charitable donation in the traditional sense. It was complete reimagining what a company could be. Under the new structure, Patagonia continues for profit business, but the profit do not go to shareholders. They go to the environmental causes, approximately $100 million annually. Many observers viewed this as a noble sacrifice, but they misses the strategic dimension of the Patagonia's decision. In the months following the announcement, Patagonia's sales increased by 30%, application for employment doubled, customers' loyalty, already high, strengthens further. What looks like a sacrifice of financial value actually created a tremendous strategic value. By aligning completely with their core purpose, Patagonia strengthened their market position, their talent pipeline, and their customer relationships. This is not just about Patagonia, it is about that fundamental shift that how value is created in today's economy. Research from EY Beacon Institute shows that companies with clear articulated purpose beyond profit outperform their peers by significant margin. They grow faster, they innovate effectively, they attract better talent, they build stronger customer loyalty. This is the ninth principle of the Great Inversion. Purpose drives profit, not reverse. The 20th century taught us that business is a war. Competition is zero sum. For me to win, you must lose. This mindset shaped everything from corporate strategy to organizational culture to leadership development. But in the networked, interdependent economy of the 21st century, this approach is increasingly counterproductive. Let me show you what I mean with a case study of a transformation at a surprising company. In the 1990s, Microsoft was known for its aggressive competitive stance. Their internal mantra was embrace, extend, extinguish, a strategy for eliminating competitors by first adopting their innovations, then making them dependent on Microsoft's platform, and finally rendering them obsolete. This approach made Microsoft powerful but also isolated. Developers, regulators, and other companies grew wary of collaboration. When Satya Nadella became CEO in 2014, he fundamentally inverted Microsoft's competitive philosophy. He embraced open source software, something which Microsoft once called as cancer. He formed partnerships with former rivals like Linux and Salesforce. He made Microsoft products available on competing platforms like iOS and Android. The results were remarkable. Developers' engagement with Microsoft's platforms increased by 300%. Enterprise cloud adoption accelerated. Microsoft's stock price quintupled. What Nadella understood, what the architects of the Great Inversion understand, that in a networked economy, the success depends on growing the entire ecosystem, not just your piece of it. This is the 10th principle of the Great Inversion. Competition outperforms pure competition. We have explored 10 fundamental inversions transforming business today. Number 1, distributed intelligence outperforms centralized control. Number 2, redundancy outperforms efficiency. Number 3, adaptability outperforms predictability. Number 4, learning rate outperforms success rate. Number 5, sensing outperforms forecasting. Number 6, distributed ownership outperforms concentrated ownership. Number 7, emergent leadership outperforms hierarchical leadership. Number 8, network effects outperform economies of scale. Number 9, purpose drives profit, not the reverse. And number 10, competition outperforms pure competition. Each of these represent a profound flip on how we think about value creation. Together they constitute the Great Inversion, a fundamental rethinking of how organizations succeed in 21st century. But here is the challenge. These principles are not independent. They are interconnected. They reinforce each other. They create synergies. And that makes implementation complex. You cannot just adopt one principle and ignore others. You have to integrate them into coherent whole. And that is why traditional change management approaches often fail when companies try to transform. Piecemeal adoption creates contradiction and tensions that ultimately undermines the efforts. What needed instead is what I called integrated inversion, a holistic approach to the company's transformation which addresses all the dimensions simultaneously. Let me show you what it looks like in practice. To implement the Great Inversion effectively, organizations need to transform across 5 dimensions simultaneously: structure from hierarchy to network, leadership from direction to enablement, culture from control to experimentation, metrics from outcomes to learning, purpose from profit to impact. When these transformations are integrated, they create a self-reinforcing system. Network structures enable emergent leadership. Experimental culture accelerate the learning rates. Purpose-driven organizations attract people who thrive in adaptive environments. The great inversion will not be completed till you know what happened at the valley of inflection. It is a bit detailed but very important. Let me tell you an unusual and dramatic story of Arcadia to close the topic and leave you with deep thoughts. Let's go. In 2018, Arcadia Medical Technologies was facing extinction. This century-old pharmaceutical giant had once been the corner store of American healthcare innovation. But now they were hemorrhaging market share to nimble biotech startups. Their stock has plummeted 70% in 18 months. Industry analysts had already written their obituary. Marcus Chen, their newly appointed CEO, had been given what everyone called a suicide mission. The board expected him to manage a dignified death, perhaps negotiate a fire sale to a competitor, or orchestrate a graceful dismantling of the once proud institution. During his first week, Marcus walked the sprawling campus of the headquarters. In Building 7, he discovered something unexpected. A small team operating completely differently from the rest of the organization. While most departments were paralyzed by rigid hierarchies and suffocating procedures, this team, officially named Advanced Therapeutics, but calling themselves the Wilderness, had been quietly experimenting with a radical new approach. They had no formal hierarchy. They made decisions based on distributed expertise rather than position. They worked in rapid cycles of learning rather than detailed long-term plans. Most importantly, they measured success not by adherence to process, but by genuine impact on patient outcomes. Marcus was stunned to learn that this tiny team of 30 people had developed promising drug candidates, while the rest of the company's research division, over 3,000 people, had produced none. "What are you doing here?" Marcus told them. "This is not just a better way to work. This is the future of Arcadia." Instead of Dismantling the company, Marcus made a breathtaking decision. He would use Arcadia's impending collapse as a catalyst for complete reinvention. He called it crossing the valley of inflection, the dangerous but necessary journey from one paradigm to another. The resistance was immediate and fierce. Senior executives who had built careers mastering the old system saw their power threatened. Middle managers whose primary function was controlling information flow found themselves irrelevant. The board questioned Marcus' sanity. "You're betting the company on an unproven model," the chairman warned him. "This is not how pharmaceutical companies work." "That's precisely the point," Marcus replied. "The way pharmaceutical companies work is killing us." Marcus began by creating 10 new wilderness teams focused on the company's most pressing challenges. Each team operated on inverted principles. Instead of hierarchical approval chains, they used advice processes where decisions were made by those closest to the information. Instead of detailed 5-year plans, they worked in 6-week cycles with continuous adaptation. Instead of siloed departments, they formed fluid networks organized around patient needs. 6 months in, the transformation hung by a thread. The old guard was actively sabotaging the effort. Investors were growing restless. Then came what employees would later call the dark week, when 3 critical clinical trials failed simultaneously. The stock dropped by another 30%. The board called an emergency meeting to remove Marcus. The night before the board meeting, Marcus couldn't sleep. Walking through the empty headquarters at 3 a.m., he found himself in the cafeteria, where he encountered Eliza Winters, a 29-year-old researcher who had joined one of the wilderness teams. "Why are you here so late?" he asked her. "We think we have found something," she said, eyes bright despite the hour. "Something big." Eliza explained that her team had been analyzing the failed trials and discovered a pattern that everyone had missed, a genetic marker that predicted which patients would respond to their flagship drug candidate. This was not just a setback, it was a breakthrough in disguise. They could rescue the trial by targeting the right patient population. The old Arcadia would have buried this discovery in layers of committees. Elisa told him, but our team was able to spot it, validate it, and develop a new protocol in just 10 days. The next morning, instead of defending his job to the board, Marcus brought in Elisa and her team. They presented not just their discovery, but something more powerful, a living demonstration of what the inverted organization could accomplish. The board gave them 60 more days. What happened in those 60 days has become corporate legend. The wilderness teams multiplied, growing from 10 to 50, then 100. The old metrics of productivity, meetings held, reports filed, hours worked, were replaced by measures of actual impact. The organizational chart was not just redrawn, it was reimagined as a dynamic network that could reconfigure around emerging opportunities. 18 months later, Arcadia received FDA approval for a groundbreaking precision medicine approach that transformed treatment for millions of patients with autoimmune disorders. The stock price quadrupled. Competitors scrambled to understand what had happened, but the numbers tell only part of the story. The real transformation was in the lives of Arcadia's people. Engineers who had been counting days to retirement found renewed purpose. Researchers who had been stifled by bureaucracy experienced the joy of creating again. Young talent that would have fled to startups instead flocked to be part of the reinvention. 5 years after what the business press now calls the Great Inversion at Arcadia, Marcus spoke at a global healthcare summit. He showed a slide with two photographs. The first showing Arcadia's campus on the day he arrived. Vast, impressive, but sterile and silent. The second showed the same campus now, smaller in physical footprint, but teeming with life, with teams working in glass-walled spaces that opened onto collaborative zones where scientists, patients, and partners commingled. We didn't just change how we worked, Marcus told the audience. We changed what we believed was possible. The structures we thought were immutable turned out to be choices. The constraints we thought were fixed turn around to be entirely within the power of reimagine. Then he revealed something that sent ripples through the industry. Arcadia was open sourcing their organizational model. They had created a detailed playbook for the Great Inversion and were making it available to any company brave enough to undertake their own transformation. We realized that our competitive advantage is not in hoarding our methods, Marcus explained. It is in our ability to continuously evolve faster than anyone else. By sharing what we have learned, we make the entire ecosystem healthier. In the years since, over 300 organizations across 27 industries have implemented versions of Arcadia's inverted model. Not all succeeded transformation is never guaranteed, but those who committed fully to the journey have created a new generation of organizations that combine the scale and resources of industrial giants with the adaptivity and humanity of organisms. The story of Arcadia is not unique. Right now, in every industry, there are pioneers building the organizations of the future, while their competitors cling to the paradigms of the past. The question is not whether the great inversion will happen. The question is whether you will be the part of creating it or whether you will be left scrambling to catch up after it's already transformed your industry. We stand at the threshold of a new era of human enterprise. The organizations we have inherited were built for a world that no longer exists. The organizations we must build now are not just adaptations of the old models, they are fundamental inversions of our most basic assumptions about how human work should be organized. This is not just a business revolution. This is about creating systems where human potential can flourish rather than be constrained. Where work becomes a source of meaning rather than merely a means of reproduction. Where organizations become regenerative forces rather than extractive ones. The path through the valley of inflection is not easy. There will be resistance, there will be setbacks, there will be moments when it seems safer to retreat to familiar territory. But on the other side of that valley lies a new landscape of possibility, and we need you to help us explore it. The future is waiting to be born. Together, we don't just adapt to change, we become its architects. This is Badar Arshi, your friend and business coach, creator of the Sphere, the Evolution Pentagon. Join our movement to reinvent the corporate systems for the complex world of tomorrow. Subscribe now to receive insights, case studies, and practical tools for implementing the Great Inversion in your organization.